The first thing my husband said wasn't an apology. It wasn't even anger. It was calm, measured, almost polite. "If you don't sign," he said, sliding the papers across the table, "I'll fight for full custody." I looked down at the documents. Divorce settlement. Asset division. Pages and pages of words that decided the rest of my life. Then I looked at my son. He was sitting on the floor in the corner of the office, pushing a toy car back and forth along the baseboard, completely unaware that his future was being used as leverage. My lawyer inhaled sharply beside me. "This is coercion," she said. "You can't threaten custody like this." My husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm not threatening," he replied. "I'm stating options." Then he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smiled. "You know my family has resources," he added. "You don't." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about divorce. This was about power. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and copier ink. Outside the window, traffic moved like nothing important was happening. Inside, my entire life was being reduced to a signature. I asked one question. "If I sign, you'll leave him with me?" My husband glanced at his attorney, then back at me. "Yes," he said, "I'll be generous." Generous. The word sat there between us, ugly and heavy. My lawyer squeezed my arm under the table. "We can fight this," she whispered. "We have a case." I knew she was right, but I also knew something else. Fighting would take time I didn't have, time he was willing to weaponize. Because if there was one thing I'd learned about the man sitting across from me, it was this. He didn't need to win forever. He just needed to win now. I picked up the pen. My lawyer froze. "Don't," she mouthed. My husband's smile widened. I signed, every page, every line. When I finished, I slid the papers back across the table. "I'll pack my things," I said quietly. "I'll be out by the end of the week." My husband stood, straightened his jacket, and looked relieved. "Smart choice," he said. "You always were practical." He didn't look at our son when he said it. That was the beginning, but it wasn't the story. We met in college, not at a party or through friends, but in a crowded campus library, both of us fighting for the same empty chair during finals week. He joked about it, offered to share the table. We ended up studying together until closing time. He was charming in an effortless way, confident without being loud, the kind of man professors liked and classmates listened to. He told me early on that his family had money. "But my dad doesn't believe in handouts," he said once, shrugging. "He made his own fortune. He expects us to do the same." At the time, I admired that. We built everything ourselves, or so I thought. After graduation, we moved into a small apartment with thin walls and unreliable heating. We worked long hours, we saved. We argued about groceries and furniture and whether we could afford to eat out that week. We bought our first car together, then our house. Nothing extravagant, just solid, comfortable. When our son was born, his grandfather visited once. He didn't bring toys. He didn't offer advice. He simply held the baby for a long time, studying his face like he was committing it to memory. "He has strong hands," he said quietly. "That matters." I didn't understand what he meant then. My husband's family stayed mostly distant, polite, formal. They never interfered with our marriage, never offered help, never asked questions. I thought that meant respect. I was wrong. The affair didn't come with drama. No late-night confessions, no emotional breakdowns. I found out because his phone lit up on the kitchen counter one morning while he was in the shower. A message preview. A woman's name, a sentence that didn't belong in a professional conversation. She was his secretary. You always know before you want to admit it. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. "It just happened," he said. "You've been busy with the baby. We grew apart." Then he added, as if it justified everything, "She understands me." Within weeks, he filed for divorce. That's when his tone changed. He stopped being defensive and started being strategic. He brought up custody early, casually, repeatedly. "You know courts look at financial stability," he said one night, scrolling on his phone. "You don't want to risk that." I didn't realize it was a threat until it was too late. By the time we sat in that office, he already knew exactly how far he could push me. And he was right, because when it came down to money versus my child, there was never a real choice. I walked away with my son and nothing else. Or so everyone thought. The house felt hollow after that. Not empty hollow, like something important had been removed and the walls were still adjusting to the space it left behind. I packed quietly. Clothes first. Then my son's things. His books. His favorite blanket. The small plastic dinosaur he refused to sleep without. I left the furniture. The framed photos. The wedding gifts that had once felt permanent. Each item I didn't take felt like a confirmation of the story everyone else was already telling themselves. She lost. She folded. She walked away with nothing. My husband didn't stop me. He hovered in doorways while I packed, checking his phone, answering emails. Once he leaned against the counter and said almost kindly, "You'll land on your feet." I didn't respond. On my last night in the house, his secretary came by. She didn't knock. She never did anymore. She stood in the kitchen wearing confidence like a coat, her heels clicking against the tile, surveying the space as if she were already deciding what to change. "Let me know if you need boxes," she said. "I have plenty." I looked at her for a moment, then back at my son asleep on the couch, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "No," I said. "We're fine." She smiled thinly. "Good. This whole thing must be overwhelming." Overwhelming wasn't the word. Humiliating was closer. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. We left the next morning before sunrise. The sky was pale, undecided. My son pressed his face to the car window, watching the house disappear behind us. "Are we going to come back?" he asked. "No," I said. "We're going somewhere new." He nodded, trusting me without question. That trust weighed more than any piece of furniture I'd left behind. My lawyer called later that afternoon. "I know this wasn't the outcome we wanted," she said carefully. "It was the outcome I chose," I replied. She sighed. "He's already telling people you gave up, that you didn't want the responsibility." I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Men like my husband never believe silence is strength. They mistake it for surrender. "Let him talk," I said. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" she asked. "There are still things we could contest, I'm sure." What I didn't say was this: I'd seen something in my husband's eyes when I signed those papers. Not relief, certainty. He believed the story was finished, and certainty makes people careless. We moved into a small rental on the edge of town. Nothing dramatic. Beige walls, thin carpet, a view of a parking lot, and a row of identical doors. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. Safe. My son adapted faster than I did. Kids always do. He made friends, learned which neighbor had a dog, discovered the joy of echoing hallways and shared stairwells. He didn't ask about the house we'd left. He didn't mention his father. That hurt more than I expected. My husband visited once during the first week. He arrived in the new car, the expensive one. He stood in the doorway scanning the apartment, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said, "this is temporary." "For us," I replied. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," I said. He kissed our son on the head, promised to call, and left without looking back. 2 days later, I heard through mutual friends that he and his secretary had moved into the house. She'd redecorated immediately. New curtains, new furniture, new life. He wanted the world to see how quickly he'd replaced me. The first letter from his father arrived a week after the divorce was finalized. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my son. Care of me. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive, the handwriting precise. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a simple note. "I'd like to see my grandson. Alone. If you're willing." No signature. He didn't need one. I remembered the way he'd held my son years ago, the weight of his gaze, the strange comment about strong hands. I folded the letter and placed it on the counter. This was the part of the story no one else knew about, the part that hadn't been discussed in court, the part my husband assumed didn't matter. I picked up my phone and replied, "When and where?" That night after my son fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the exhaustion finally catch up with me. I hadn't cried yet. Not when I signed the papers. Not when I left the house. Not when I watched another woman take my place. But sitting there listening to my son breathe in the next room, something inside me loosened. Not grief, resolve. I didn't know what his grandfather wanted yet. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I had walked away from money, from comfort, from appearances. I had not walked away from my son. And that choice, the one my husband thought made me weak, was about to matter more than he could possibly imagine. I met my father-in-law at a diner just off the highway. Not a country club, not his office. A diner with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus that smelled faintly of coffee and grease. That alone told me something. He was already there when I arrived, sitting straight-backed with his hands folded on the table, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of him. He didn't stand when I walked in. He simply looked up, eyes sharp assessing. "You're on time," he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded once, satisfied. "Where's the boy with a sitter?" I said. "You asked to meet alone." "Good," he said. "This isn't a conversation for children." We ordered. He waved off small talk. No questions about how I was holding up, no commentary on the divorce. Instead, he got straight to it. "My son thinks you gave up," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "Is that true?" I didn't hesitate. I chose my child. A pause. "That's not the same thing," he said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded again. Most people confuse the two. That was the first crack. He leaned back slightly. "I raised my son to be independent," he continued. "I didn't give him money. I didn't bail him out. I told him if he wanted something, he'd earn it." I waited. And yet he went on, "He still believes he deserves things." There was no bitterness in his voice, just disappointment. "He told me you folded," the old man said, "that you didn't want the responsibility." I met his gaze. "He threatened to take my son." The words landed heavy between us. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. So he said slowly he learned nothing. I didn't reply. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a document, a photograph. It was of my son. Standing in his living room months earlier holding a wooden block set his grandfather had made by hand. My son's face was serious, focused, intent. "He didn't ask for help," the old man said quietly. "He figured it out." I felt my throat tighten. "He reminds me of my father," he added. "That's rare." Then he looked up at me again. "And you remind me of his mother." My breath caught. "She didn't complain," he said. "Didn't beg. Didn't posture. She just did what needed doing." I hadn't known him then, but the way he said it made me believe him. "My son doesn't know why I asked you here," he continued. "And I don't intend to tell him." "Why did you?" I asked. He finally took a sip of his coffee. "Because men who threaten children for leverage don't deserve to decide what legacy looks like." The diner seemed to fade around us. He reached into his pocket again this time, pulling out a slim envelope. "I've already spoken to my attorney," he said. "I won't ask you to promise anything. I don't trust promises." He slid the envelope toward me. "But I want you to understand something." I didn't open it. "Everything I built," he said, "was meant to go to someone who understood sacrifice." He stood then, leaving cash on the table. "Don't say anything to my son," he added. "Not yet." He paused, then looked at me once more. "You didn't lose," he said. "You just stepped off the board." And then he walked out, leaving the envelope between us. I sat there for a long time after he was gone. When I finally opened it, there was only one sentence inside. "I see what others missed." I didn't tell anyone about the diner, not my lawyer, not my friends, certainly not my husband. I folded the note from my father-in-law and placed it in the back of a drawer beneath insurance papers and expired warranties, things no one ever looks at unless they have to. Life settled into a new rhythm, School drop-offs, work, grocery lists. Evenings spent helping my son with homework at a small kitchen table that wobbled if you leaned too hard on one side. From the outside, it looked like I'd lost. From the inside, something was quietly aligning. My husband, on the other hand, was enjoying his victory. He didn't hide it. Photos appeared online, dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips. His secretary, now officially his girlfriend, posed beside him like a prize he'd won through strategy and persistence. He called once late one evening. "I just wanted to make sure you're managing," he said. "I can increase support if things get tight." It was said generously, thoughtfully. I heard the subtext clearly. I declined. He paused. "Pride isn't always smart." "No," I replied, "but clarity is." He didn't understand that answer, and I didn't explain it. Weeks passed. Then the call came. My father-in-law had passed away. It wasn't unexpected. He'd been slowing down for years. Still, the finality of it landed heavier than I anticipated. Not because of grief, though there was some of that, but because of what I knew his absence would trigger. The reading of the will. My husband called immediately after hearing the news. His voice was different this time. Alert, focused. "Have you heard?" he asked. "Yes." "There will be a meeting with the attorney," he said. "You don't need to come. It's just family business." I almost smiled. "I'll be there," I said. He hesitated. "It's really not necessary. I think it is." Silence stretched on the line. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't expect anything." I didn't. That was the point. The law office was quiet in the way expensive places always are. Soft carpet, muted colors, the faint smell of polished wood and paper. My husband arrived early with his girlfriend. She wore black, though not convincingly. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, announcing confidence she hadn't yet earned. They didn't acknowledge me. My lawyer sat beside me, calm, unreadable. The attorney handling the estate entered precisely on time. He was older, gray-haired, with the steady demeanor of someone who had seen families unravel in rooms just like this one. "We'll begin," he said. He read through the formalities first: properties, accounts, investments. My husband listened intently, nodding along occasionally, exchanging looks with his girlfriend. Everything sounded exactly as expected. Then the attorney paused. "There is an additional provision," he said. My husband straightened. "This clause supersedes all previous assumptions regarding direct inheritance." The attorney continued. I felt my lawyer shift slightly beside me. The attorney looked down at the document. "All primary assets," he read, "are to be placed in trust for the benefit of my grandson." The room went still. My husband frowned. "That's not," he began. The attorney held up a hand. "The trust names the child as sole beneficiary. The custodial parent is designated as trustee." He looked directly at me. My husband's girlfriend's smile faltered. "This must be a mistake," my husband said. "I'm his son." The attorney nodded once. That was considered. He turned the page. The will further specifies that any son who engages in infidelity during marriage and attempts to use a child as leverage in divorce proceedings forfeits all inheritance rights. The words echoed. Infidelity, leverage, forfeits. My husband went pale. His girlfriend looked at him confused. "What does that mean?" The attorney didn't look up. "It means," he said evenly, "that you receive nothing beyond the personal items already distributed." My husband stood abruptly. "This is insane. He wouldn't do this." The attorney finally looked up. He already did. No one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was absolute. No one spoke for several seconds. Not because they were confused. Because they were calculating. My husband was the first to recover. He laughed, once sharp and disbelieving. "You can't be serious," he said. "This has to be some kind of misunderstanding." The attorney didn't react. He simply adjusted his glasses and waited. "This clause is airtight," he said calmly. "It was drafted years ago, reaffirmed twice. Your father was very specific." My husband's girlfriend reached for his arm. "What does this mean for us?" she whispered. He pulled away from her without looking. "It means my lawyer said gently that your son is now the beneficiary of everything that mattered. Everything." The words seemed to drain the room of oxygen. My husband sank back into his chair, color leaving his face in slow waves. This wasn't anger yet. It was something closer to disbelief, the kind that comes when a man realizes the rules he trusted no longer apply to him. "This is a trap," he said. "She planned this." The attorney shook his head. "The trust predates the divorce." My husband turned toward me then, eyes sharp. "You knew." "I listened," I replied. His girlfriend stood abruptly. "So we just get nothing?" she asked. The attorney glanced at his notes. "You retain the house awarded in the divorce, and the remaining personal assets listed." Her mouth opened, then closed. That wasn't what she'd imagined. The victory she'd pictured had been larger, louder, more permanent. My husband ran a hand through his hair. "This can be contested." "It can," the attorney agreed. "But it will fail." The certainty in his voice landed harder than any accusation. I watched my husband's posture change. The confidence that had once filled the room with him began to fold inward. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted, searching for leverage that no longer existed. "You're enjoying this?" he said to me. I shook my head. "I'm witnessing it." "There's a difference." The meeting ended shortly after that. Papers were signed. Copies distributed. No one shook hands. Outside, the hallway felt longer than before. My husband caught up to me near the elevator. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. He did. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, then turned back. "You think this makes you powerful?" I met his gaze. "No, it makes me responsible." The doors closed between us. That night I tucked my son into bed and watched him sleep longer than usual. He didn't know his life had just changed. That felt right. The next few weeks were quiet. My husband stopped calling. His girlfriend disappeared from social media. Friends who'd once taken sides suddenly found reasons to stay neutral. Money does that. It rearranges loyalties. I met with the estate attorney again, this time alone. He explained timelines, obligations, safeguards. Everything was structured around stability, education, long-term security. This wasn't about punishment, he said. "Your father-in-law wanted to ensure continuity." I nodded. He always thought ahead. As trustee, I had authority, but also limits. I couldn't touch the assets for myself. Everything had to be for my son's benefit. That was fine. That had always been the point. I chose not to revisit the divorce settlement. I didn't claw back what I legally could have. The house and cars my husband kept weren't worth the cost of dragging the past forward. Instead, I focused on building something quiet and solid, a different kind of victory. One afternoon, I received a message from my husband's lawyer. He'd like to talk. I didn't respond. Some conversations happened too late to matter. Months later, I drove past the old house. The yard was overgrown. The curtains were gone. A for sale sign leaned crookedly near the driveway. I felt nothing. Power, I'd learned, doesn't announce itself. It waits. I heard about the house through someone else, a mutual acquaintance. The kind who speaks softly as if lowering their voice might soften the truth. "They're selling," she said. Quickly. I thanked her and ended the call. I didn't need details. I could already picture it. The rushed listing. The price slightly too high, then quietly reduced. The furniture gone before the open house, leaving rooms that echoed when you stepped inside. My husband had never been good at endings. He liked control, momentum, the illusion that things were always moving forward because of him. This wasn't forward. This was fallout. His girlfriend left not long after the will was finalized. That part didn't surprise me. She hadn't signed up for a modest house in the suburbs and limited assets. She'd signed up for legacy, access, influence. When those evaporated, so did she. He tried to call me then, once, twice, 3 times in one afternoon. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to negotiate. What he had underestimated wasn't the money. It was the shift. Because money can be replaced, status can be rebuilt, but certainty once lost doesn't come back easily. I saw it when we crossed paths weeks later at our son's school. He stood near the fence, hands in his pockets, watching children run across the playground. He looked thinner, older, less sure of where to stand. When our son ran toward me laughing, he didn't follow. He just watched. "You look well," he said when I approached. "Thank you." There was a pause. "I didn't think it would end like this," he admitted. I waited. "I thought you'd fight," he continued. "Scream. Take me to court. I planned for that." I nodded. "I know." He frowned. "Then why didn't you?" Because if I had fought him, I would have been playing his game. Because silence had taught me patience. Because some victories only appear when you stop pushing. "I chose differently," I said. He studied my face, searching for something. Anger, satisfaction, regret. He found none. "You won," he said finally. I shook my head. "No," I finished. That distinction mattered. My son thrived. Children always do when they're no longer caught in the middle of adult power struggles. He slept better, laughed more, asked fewer questions about why people were upset. His world had narrowed in the best possible way. School friends home. Safety. That was the inheritance his grandfather had cared about most. The assets were handled quietly. Investments stabilized. Accounts were placed under long-term management. I learned to read statements without attaching emotion to them. They weren't symbols. They were tools. Tools to make sure my son never had to choose between security and dignity the way I had. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, I found the photograph my father-in-law had shown me at the diner. My son younger, focused, intent. I placed it in a frame and set it on the shelf. Some people build monuments, others build foundations. My husband sent one last message months later. "I hope one day you'll understand I did what I thought was best." I read it once, then deleted it. Understanding doesn't require agreement, and forgiveness doesn't require proximity. I didn't hate him. I simply didn't rearrange my life around him anymore. On the anniversary of the divorce, my son asked a question while we were making dinner. "Why don't we live with Dad?" I knelt to his level. "Because sometimes adults make choices," I said, "and other adults choose to protect what matters most." He thought about that. "Did Grandpa protect me?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He did." He smiled satisfied and went back to stirring the sauce. That was enough. The quiet that followed surprised me. Not the absence of my husband's voice that silence felt earned, but the way my own thoughts finally settled. No more rehearsing conversations that would never happen. No more waiting for the next demand, the next threat disguised as reason. Life didn't become dramatic after everything ended. It became ordinary. And that I learned was the point. Mornings began the same way every day. Breakfast at the small table, my son complaining about socks that didn't feel right, me reminding him again that cereal bowls don't belong on the couch. We walked to school together when the weather allowed. He held my hand less now, but he still glanced back to make sure I was there. That mattered more than anything I'd signed away. The trust required oversight, patience, paperwork. I attended meetings, asked questions, learned terms I'd never thought I'd need to understand. Not because I wanted control, but because I owed my son competence. I never told him the full story. Children don't need to carry adult betrayals. What he knew was simple: his grandfather loved him, and his home was safe. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, I received a call from the estate attorney. "Your former husband has requested access to certain records," he said neutrally. "On what grounds?" I asked. "He believes there may be a way to revisit the terms." I closed my eyes. "Is there?" I asked. "No," the attorney replied. "But he's struggling with the finality. Finality has a way of doing that." I thanked him and ended the call. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter. Acceptance. I thought back to the woman I'd been in that office pen, hovering above the paper while my son played on the floor. I remembered the way my husband had smiled, convinced he'd won something permanent. What he'd won was a moment. What I'd chosen was a future. That difference only becomes clear with time. We ran into my former husband once more by chance at a grocery store near the school. He looked startled to see us. Not angry, not defensive, just smaller. He waved awkwardly. My son waved back, polite but distant. "Hey," he said to me. "You both look good. Thank you." There was an opening there for bitterness, for confrontation, for something unresolved. I let it close. He lingered as if waiting for permission to speak further. When it didn't come, he nodded and walked away. I watched him go without satisfaction. Only relief. That evening, after my son went to bed, I sat on the balcony of our apartment, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and neighbors settling in for the night. I thought about the choices I'd made, walking away, signing papers everyone else thought defined loss, trusting silence over spectacle. People often misunderstand strength. They think it looks like shouting, like winning arguments, like taking everything you can because you can. Sometimes strength looks like restraint, like choosing not to humiliate someone who already understands what they've lost, like building quietly instead of burning loudly. I didn't destroy my former husband's life. I simply refused to sacrifice my son to preserve his illusion of control. That choice echoed far beyond that office. It shaped how I moved through the world afterward. More measured, less reactive. No longer interested in proving anything to anyone who didn't have to live with the consequences. I learned that legacies aren't about money. They're about values passed forward when no one is watching. My father-in-law understood that. He didn't leave speeches. He didn't leave instructions filled with sentiment. He left clarity. And clarity changes people. Years from now, my son will be old enough to ask harder questions. Why things ended the way they did. Why his father isn't part of our daily life. Why his grandfather made the choices he did. When that day comes, I'll answer honestly without bitterness, without rewriting the past to make myself look better. I'll tell him this, that love doesn't threaten. That power doesn't need leverage. That dignity is something you protect even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. And I'll tell him something else. That walking away from money isn't weakness. That choosing people over pride is never a mistake. And that sometimes the quietest decisions shape the strongest futures. If you've listened this far, maybe parts of this story felt familiar. Maybe you've been asked to choose between comfort and conscience. Maybe someone mistook your silence for surrender. Maybe you walked away from something everyone else said you should fight for. If that's you, know this. Not every victory looks loud from the outside. Not every loss is real. And not every ending is the end of the story. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe I did the right thing, or would you have chosen differently? Share your perspective in the comments. Read others. These conversations matter more than we realize. And if you'd like to continue listening to stories about resilience, family, and the moments that quietly change everything, consider subscribing. Thank you for spending your time here.